Okay folks, in this video I'm going to tell you about 13 mind-blowing movies that you will not be able to stop thinking about. And these are not going to be obvious picks. I'm not going with movies like The Matrix or Memento, things you've seen. These are going to be 13 lesser-known movies that are going to just twist your brain into a pretzel. My number 13 pick being a real gem of a thriller titled Exam. In this movie, a group of young professionals are taking what appears to be a written exam, yet this exam is for all the marbles. This decides who is the successor, who's going to be running this major tech company, and the exam is not on paper. They actually have to figure out how to survive in a pretty wild experimental room. In fact, Exam is similar to the classic movie Cube in a lot of ways. And for a low-budget indie thriller, it's a pretty thinky movie. It's got some really clever moments in it, and you can try to stay one step ahead of the people taking the exam, or you can just go along for the ride. Either way, this is a really interesting movie that is bound to keep you scratching your head for a couple of days at the very least. Now, one that may have you scratching your head indefinitely, in fact, I'm still trying to sort out portions of this movie, is Under the Silver Lake. Now, this is actually the second film from the same director as It Follows, and while I don't think this is nearly as good, he really did reach for the brass ring with Under the Silver Lake, and I'll leave it up to you whether or not he achieved his goal. Now, this is a very glossy movie. It's very well produced. If you've never quite understood why people rave about Andrew Garfield so much, this movie will settle it. You'll understand why people think he's such a great actor. He does some amazing stuff in this movie, but this is a weird one. It is not for everybody. If you like mysteries though, especially ones that are very tricky to solve, Under the Silver Lake is a puzzle of a movie that you could easily watch multiple times and still find interesting details. However, if you're not into the really strange neo-noir vibe of Under the Silver Lake, it's going to be a difficult puzzle for you to get into. Now, believe it or not, my next pick is a lesser-known movie with some big stars like Ryan Reynolds and Melissa McCarthy in The Nines.
I know who you are. I know what you are.
I'm not the one deceiving him. He'll figure it out eventually, and when he does, who do you think he's gonna blame?
Now, despite having those big names in it, this is a fairly low-budget indie flick that's actually directed by a first-time director. However, the director, John August, is more famous for having written a lot, and I mean a lot, of Tim Burton movies, including Big Fish, so a fantastic writer. And the thing about The Nines is you never quite know where it's headed. Ryan Reynolds actually plays multiple characters in this, and their lives become intertwined. Sounds interesting enough, but The Nines takes things to a pretty incredible level, especially for something done at this budget level. But I've got some other movies on this list done at very low budget levels that are mind-blowing as well. This one though, again, for a Ryan Reynolds indie flick, it's surprisingly thinky. Now, if it's been a while since you've been thoroughly creeped out, you may want to check out one of Robin Williams' most creepy performances in 1 Hour Photo. Some of you may remember the days before digital cameras where you had to take your photos to a place, get them developed, and someone saw all the photos of your family, or whatever you've been up to in your free time. But Robin Williams plays one of these guys, and he becomes way too attached to one of those families. The costume design for him is creepy. The production design on the movie has this odd, sterile feel. To me, this feels a lot like a classic Alfred Hitchcock flick. Now, Robin Williams has played a bad guy before. He's done it quite well before. In fact, there are even better movies like Insomnia. But 1 Hour Photo maybe has the best creepy performance Williams has ever done. If you've been a fan of his your life and you've never seen this movie, I highly recommend it, but be prepared to be thoroughly spooked. My number 9 pick might spook the crap out of you too. Coherence is easily the lowest budget movie on the list. Just by checking out some of the clips here, you can tell this looks like it was filmed kind of in one night with almost no professional lighting, but it is one of the headier movies on this list. It's basically a dinner party with some old friends while there is a comet passing over Earth. And after a brief power outage, weird things start happening, and this group of old friends can't figure out, is someone playing a trick on them? Is it in their heads? Is it the comet? Is it the ketamine that somebody brought? And that's not all. It's not just a mystery. There's some wild stuff that happens in this movie with zero, and I mean zero, special effects. This is just a really well-written science fiction thriller, and it's unfortunate the production value is so low on it. While it doesn't really bother me, it is going to turn some people off and prevent them from watching a really clever sci-fi flick. I mean, this is one that just with a little bit more money would have been kind of a smash hit, I think. They honestly kind of missed the mark with the way that it was produced. However, it's not bad. The acting works. The production value is easily to look past because of all the clever things that are happening in the story. If you like movies like that and you don't mind the low production value, Coherence is one of the best picks off of this list.
Chris, it's Michael, your best friend. Can I come up? Yeah, man. Okay, I'm coming up, all right? Don't shoot.
Now, my number 8 pick falls into a similar category of a low-budget sci-fi thriller. However, first-time writer-directors Moorhead and Benson did an amazing job with resolution with very little money. So this movie, even though it was filmed on a micro-budget, looks and feels a lot more polished than Coherence. Everything's done with more intention, and you're not having to look past the low-budget nature of it. Resolution gets even weirder and wilder, especially if you can be fairly patient. There's quite a bit of setup required for Resolution, but if you clicked on this video because you want to watch something that's really going to put some wrinkles in your brain, Resolution has so many layers to it, and Moorhead and Benson went on to do some other great movies like The Endless, Spring, and more recently, Synchronic. Their first movie, though, Resolution, still holds up as a solid gem. For my number 7 pick, we're gonna go with one of the greatest horror movies ever produced in India. It is titled Tumbad. Now, I say horror movie, and it definitely is, but it is much more of a fable. In this movie, a man basically finds a way to attain unlimited wealth. But there's a catch, and the catch is really the whole thing with this movie. There's a demon, there's a cave, there's gold, and an amazing story that's just really well told. Now, depending on where you find this one to stream, you may find an English dubbed version, but it's very likely going to be with subtitles, yet I still highly recommend pursuing this one. It's got an incredibly creepy mood, but ultimately, as you get towards the end, the fable hits perfectly with this thing. There's a great lesson in it, and it's just a solid flick from India. But it's a good time to mention that unlike most of my videos on this channel, this is not based on a specific streaming service, so all of these movies are spread out on different services at different times, but you can access almost any movie you want using today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. So like all VPNs, CyberGhost keeps your web browsing safe, secure, and private. You need to have a VPN nowadays. You need to protect yourself. It's not just a smart idea, it's becoming a necessity. But if you're gonna use one, you might as well use the one I recommend because CyberGhost VPN allows you to access way more movies and shows than you could ever possibly hope to watch with a simple flick of a switch. And that's because CyberGhost has specialized servers that allow you to watch Netflix, Prime Video, most of the major streaming services in a wide variety of countries, and they have different movies available depending on where you are in the world. I mean, it's easy to use, they have 24/7 customer support, they have a 45-day money-back guarantee, so if you're not happy with it, you can get a full refund, so there's really no risk. And my viewers can pay as little as $2.03 a month to unlock basically unlimited movies and shows. They're also going to give you 4 extra months for free, plus that 45-day money-back guarantee. Just use the link in the description. It's a great deal and a great way to just unlock more movies than you could ever hope to watch. But speaking of movies, let's move on with the rest of them on this list. My number 6 pick changes things up a little bit with a comedy starring Will Ferrell that, yes, will still keep you thinking for days. Stranger Than Fiction. Now, in all of Will Ferrell's filmography, this movie really stands out. And that's because it's not a Will Ferrell comedy, it's just a movie he happens to be acting in. And in this movie, he plays an IRS auditor who suddenly begins to hear the narration of his life. Emma Thompson plays a famous writer working on her next big book, and she's writing his life as it's happening. It's a very clever paradox that opens up the door for an incredibly interesting thought experiment. You cannot help but to put yourself in his place and wonder what you might do if something like this happened to you. It's very clever, well written, and really kind of heartwarming and touching at the same time. Very different from Will Ferrell movies. If you're not a fan of his, I still highly recommend checking this one out. Now, believe it or not, we've got a movie from 2023 on this list that actually made it all the way to my number 5 spot. If you don't know famous director David Cronenberg, he has a son named Brandon who is directing movies now, and his latest, Infinity Pool, is a wild one.
It looks just like me.
Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth star in this. They are both incredible in it. And this too sets the stage for a wild thought experiment. While they're on vacation in a foreign country, something horrible happens and they're sentenced to death. But in this country, if you've got enough money, they will create clones to execute for you. That's the setup. I know it's a little wonky and it doesn't quite sound like something that could happen for real. You've got to overlook that in order to be delivered this incredibly bizarre tale that has some mind-warping moments in it. And don't get me wrong, this is not just chaos and craziness for the sake of being sick or weird. This movie is sick and it is weird, but it makes some strong points about some weird concepts I never would have considered. And it's just a really slick movie. Now, this too is not for everybody, but if you like weirder stuff, especially if you like David Cronenberg movies, then you gotta check out Infinity Pool. It's one of the cooler, weird movies I've seen all year. Now, a movie that actually has a lot in common with Coherence, believe it or not, but that just has a much better production value and a bigger, more grandiose climax is Time Crimes. Now, Coherence didn't really deal with time travel, but there's some similarities and some crossover. Time Crimes deals directly with time travel. In fact, there is a time travel machine, yet this isn't like Back to the Future. They're not going through time. You're only jumping in time a few minutes, and the chaos that creates is absolutely insane. In fact, if you're a Rick and Morty fan and you love just how wild and crazy those episodes get, Time Crimes is very much like that. Now, it's got a very different tone than Rick and Morty, obviously, but the way it explores very short bursts of time travel is just absolutely mind-blowing. And you also get like some slasher flick vibes with this at times. I wouldn't really classify it as one, but that's in there too. This is just a top-tier movie I've been recommending here on this channel for years. Hopefully, depending on when you watch this video, you can find it on streaming somewhere, because it is just top shelf stuff. So is my next pick, which also deals with time travel, but just give me a break. It's the last time one on this list, and it is one of the greatest time travel movies ever made. It also happens to be one of the lowest budget time travel movies ever made, proving you don't need a lot of money to make a really great movie, but you do need a solid script and even more solid story, which is exactly what you get with Primer. Now, in this movie, a couple of engineers develop a time machine in their garage. This, too, is very different from any other time machine. They didn't make it into a car. They're not going back to the 1920s or wherever you would want to go. They are just going like a day's difference. But, again, the chaos it creates is wild. And I mean, if you want to get nuts, watch Time Crimes and Primer as a double feature. I mean, these go up to and maybe even beyond Christopher Nolan level mind blows, again, for relatively no money with Primer. But my number 2 pick stands out on this list, not just because it's a really strong recommendation being my number 2 pick, but because it's very different from a lot of the other ones on this list. There's no real sci-fi elements or anything like that. Yet, if you have not seen the original Oldboy, this one is going to stick with you for a while. Now, I don't just say that because of the wild twist that occurs somewhere in this movie, but the setup for this is kind of hard to shake. Now, I do not recommend pursuing the Josh Brolin American remake. I think it's a terrible American remake. It really fumbled the ball, but the original is still such a masterpiece. In this movie, a man is imprisoned and not in jail. He's actually locked in a room for years and loses his mind. When he's finally able to escape, he seeks revenge. It's a fairly simple setup. However, the idea of being trapped inside a prison cell like the one he's trapped in is another thought experiment that's hard to shake. And then, once you find out what actually happened to him, it is earth-shaking stuff. On top of that, it's just an incredibly well-produced movie. There's stunning visuals in this one. I mean, this movie is a cult classic for a reason. It's such a shame the American remake was so weird and not cool the way this one is. If somehow this one has eluded you, I would imagine it's the one on the list most people have seen, but if you haven't, my goodness, it's going to be one of your new favorite movies, unless you're easily disgusted. If you're easily disgusted, stay away from Oldboy. And then I could have put any movie from director David Lynch on this list, and it would have found a home somewhere. But my number one pick is far and away my favorite David Lynch movie, Mulholland Drive. Now, this is another one. If you do not do weird, then you're not going to like this movie at all. But if you love weird stuff and somehow you've never seen this gem, it is easily one of the most mind-blowing movies ever made. And not just the big twists in things. There are little twists in this. Microcosm twists that happen inside single solitary scenes that you can easily miss on the first watch. This movie too is kind of a puzzle that you can solve. There's even a puzzle in the movie. This is one of those movies where some of the broad strokes I think you can get on the first watch, but then there's other little things that David Lynch put in there that pertain to the story, but that aren't necessary, that are still clever, interesting little thought experiments. I know I said that word a lot, but they really are in Mulholland Drive. This is one that will haunt you for days. Again, unless you just don't do weird, it's going to be really hard to get into Mulholland Drive. But that is the list. Thanks again to CyberGhost for sponsoring another video. You can go check out their link in the video description, see if it's a good fit for you. But you will see me on the next one.